Welcome to the Spectators podcast. Here are your hosts, Corey and Jeff.
Welcome, spectators, to an extra special episode. It's so special I can't even say the word special. Of the Spectators podcast. It is a Halloween episode, so we are very excited to bring this to you today. So I am Jeff, and I think to my mic adjacent is Corey. Who's beside me here?
Greetings, everybody, for listening to the Spectators podcast. And today, you are with Fanhausen or Beardhausen or Coreyhausen, whatever you want to go with.
Welcome. I'm glad to have you.
I am excited to be here and talk about some wrestling.
Oh, I figured you would talk about politics, so I'm glad you're gonna stay in your zone.
No politics for me over here.
So as
if you start talking about politics, you might be cursed.
Oh no, we don't want that. And as you can see, I am wearing a referee's uniform, so I'll make sure to keep everything in line with Beardhausen, and whenever Corey decides to show up again, we can certainly make sure he stays in line as well. The punishment is you have to watch 14 straight hours of Don Cherry's Rock'em Sock'em Hockey. So make sure you behave today. Yeah, so I do have a question for you as we begin our episode. Are you feeling Ucey today?
Oh, well, yes, I am feeling quite Ucey today. A little bit more Ucey today than I was yesterday, as you can see.
So
how about you? How Ucey are you feeling? Are you feeling up to your usual Ucey self?
I don't know, but I am sitting outside on my deck, and it's quite rainy and cold, so my level of Uciness could be higher, that's for sure. But I think it's prevalent. I know we talked a lot about the Bloodline last episode. It's nice to have you back, Corey. But I think it's important to talk about the Bloodline once again, because I think it's one of the biggest talking points in the world of professional wrestling. I think it even eclipsed Bray Wyatt's promo, which I think for the most part, folks were more excited about Bray Wyatt than the Bloodline. But after the exciting segment that we saw on Friday Night Smackdown, it's the talk of the town. So your thoughts on Friday Night Smackdown and what we saw from the Bloodline?
Oh, the Bloodline on Friday was a marvelous acting event.
We could spend the whole podcast just talking about that one segment. Literally.
There were funny parts about it. There were serious parts about it. I love how they were able to flip between, Roman being so serious when he was pissed off at Jay, when Jay said, I don't care, I don't give a damn what the tribal chief has to say or whatever. And then those moments of Ucey and the crowd just eating that up from Sami Zayn, and Sami just putting on an absolute show for everybody. It was amazing. It was probably the best Bloodline outing I've seen in a long time. Like, most compelling and most interesting and fun. How about you? What do you think?
Well, there's so many layers to it, right? So it was so incredible. I've listened to actually a few reaction podcasts and videos on it, and I think when I was watching it, I think it had everything. It had drama, it had comedy. I think I don't know about you, but when I was watching it, and Jay said, "I don't give a damn what the tribal chief says," and that whole segment from there was just perfect, right? It was like Roman reacts, does that slow, and everyone feels the slow turn. Jay saying yeah, and then realizing what exactly he said, and just the non-verbal was incredible, because it just said so much, right? And then of course Sami stepping in, and saying it and cracking him up. But like the best thing is like when he said it, like Roman looks at him and goes, "Oh, god damn you!" Right? Like he's like, why, man? Like, come on." Because it was actually really interesting because it was quite a serious scene, right? Because this is the first time really in the Bloodline, outside of Jay, Roman getting Jay into the Bloodline, where you've seen some insubordination, right? Nobody else really has gone against the Tribal Chief's word. So I thought that was incredible. So it was actually really interesting juxtaposition in the fact that you kind of, what some folks were pointing out, and I agree with, is that like you had this really serious moment broken up, and you could maybe critique that maybe you shouldn't have broken it up, but like on the flip side, you get what you get from Sami's motivation. You understand why, right? He's trying to break them so Roman laughs, so he doesn't go after Jay. He's trying to protect Jay, even though Jay was the one going after Sami. And I think for me, what really encapsulates this whole Bloodline experience with Sami is that like you're really seeing Sami, who right now is technically a heel, but really he's a face if you think about it. He's like I said last episode, he is a face playing a heel. He's not a heel playing a heel. I think it's really incredible to see, and you're constantly seeing that in the Bloodline. Like when they attacked Sheamus last week, like they kept going at him, and Jace and Sami stopped it. He was like, "No, we've done enough. Like that's it, right?" Like I think if Roman was there, he would have just said, "Keep going," right? Like take his whole arm off, right? So I think it was absolutely incredible, and I think it was so incredible that when Bray did his promo at the very end, people were so like enamored and like excited and exhausted from that one segment, plus the few other couple segments they had after, that like it sort of felt a little flat with Bray, because Bray's thing's all about like anticipation and what's going to happen next, right? And they introduced the Uncle Howdy character, right, which is all I think really interesting, but it's not. I don't think it's as gripping because of what happened with the Bloodline, because that entire 10-minute segment that they had at the beginning of the show just leaves you with so many questions, especially with the Usos defending their titles at Crown Jewel, and same with Roman, right? It's for me, it's the path that I was hoping was going to happen after Crown Jewel. After Clash at the Castle, right? Like we're really starting to see the cracks in the Bloodline, right? Like I said, this is the first time you've ever seen any insubordination, and it's probably going to continue, especially because I think, as I said to you, I think really Roman is keeping Sami in the Bloodline to punish Jay. But even before that, right? Like I think he's always had resentment against Jay because Jay didn't snap into line as quick as his brother did, right? So I think this whole story is sort of, Sami's around to really, to punish Jay for not really falling in line in general. And I guess the question really remains is what is going to happen with the Bloodline moving forward?
Yeah, I agree. Like, getting to that point of Bray, you have an anticipation, like, oh, Bray's coming. I'm excited to see Bray on TV. I'm ready to see his segment, and it was a little flat. Like the show was good. The Bloodline segment was so good. Again, one of the best that I've seen in a long time. That by the time we got to Bray, I was just kind of like, it was all right. It wasn't bad. Yeah. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't as good as we'd seen in the last few weeks. But there is some really compelling pieces there. Like, who is this Uncle Howdy character? Who is it going to be that's going to join the group? I think it shows a little more truth to what I was saying last week about the masks and everyone in the group potentially wearing the masks, as we saw that kind of same gray mask that they had before, and he took it off to reveal his Uncle Howdy face, right? So
no, it'll be interesting, and again, I think it's just because of the gravity of what we saw with the Bloodline, like, because I think the Bray Wyatt story is still one of the most talked about stories, and I think what's really interesting now with the Bloodline and Bray Wyatt, I think they've taken SmackDown from being what was perceived as the second level of the Raw and SmackDown. Now I think it's elevated. I think more people are wanting to watch SmackDown over Raw. I mean, there's other things with Raw, right? Like Raw is a 3-hour show. I think they're starting to struggle to book those 3-hour shows. It's like, I think Raw on Monday was probably one of the weakest shows I've seen in a long time. Like, I really didn't want to. I actually don't think I watched it. Actually, I think I just saw some of the main key stories. And I didn't watch it because I just wasn't interested in a lot of the storylines because it was so blah. was so bland, right? Like there wasn't a lot to go there, and I think part of it too is I think they're kind of feeling stuck by Crown Jewel, right? Because it's a week away. They've kind of pretty much have all their matchups set, and I think they're all kind of waiting to get over Crown Jewel so they can focus on because they can't really focus on Survivor Series and Crown Jewel at the same time. I think that's the difficulty of having two pay-per-views in 1 month, right? Because you probably would start building the storylines for. Sorry, it is Halloween here, and you probably can hear.
I hear all the bang and the clang in the background.
I am
very
outside,
distracting.
It is Halloween, but I think this is the challenge they're going to be facing, and up until next weekend when they can get Crown Jewel done, is the issue of getting past Crown Jewel to build the storylines for Survivor Series, which in my mind they see Survivor Series as a higher pay-per-view than they do Crown Jewel. Because if you look at some of the matches at Crown Jewel, they're pretty flashy, right? You've got Lashley and Lesnar, you've got Strowman and Omos, right? The OC versus Judgment Day, right? Like, I mean, the OC and Judgment Day has a storyline, but like Lashley and Lesnar really was created out of thin air, in a 2-week feud.
Another one of those. They need a big guy, big names to make a Crown Jewel pay-per-view.
That's not Goldberg.
Goldberg.
And of course Roman and Logan, right? And that's a challenging one because you don't. They're trying very hard to make it a believable match, but it really isn't, right? I know Jake Paul beat Silva yesterday in a decision, so they'll probably use that storyline moving forward, right? But I think it's a challenge for them to try and. I mean, they tried it on Friday, right? They tried to make Logan more of a threat than he is, and I'm sure next Saturday Paul will get his lucky punch in on Roman. That seems pretty obvious. But I think they have this challenge with Crown Jewel. It's such a gimmicky pay-per-view, and like you don't. They're not really ending any like maybe they will with Omos and Strowman, right? But like it's just gimmicky matches, right? I guess they're gonna end the Bayley and Bianca feud, right? That probably will end with their match. Again, I guess there's the McIntyre and Cross one, which that whole feud's a bit strange to me. But anyways, what I'm getting at is I think SmackDown has such compelling storylines. I think more folks are really wanting to tune into SmackDown. And that wasn't the case when I started watching 6 months ago. SmackDown was like, let's just throw things against the wall and see if it's going to work. That's where Max and Male models came from, right? Which I know some folks like them, but I'm not a fan of that. I skip all their matches. And I'm glad LA Knight is doing his thing. But so it's been a really interesting turn of events, I think, when it comes to SmackDown. I think the ratings are through the roof. They're getting over 2 million people watching. I mean, ratings are a bit of a caveat, of course, because Monday Night Football is on Monday, so that does affect Raw's numbers. But yeah, so I think it's been really interesting, and I think they are sort of caught in this Crown Jewel mess in that they have to, especially with Raw, because Raw is a bigger show, of trying to build some feuds, but also like thinking of it to the future for Survivor Series.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like with the whole idea of having to put almost like a filler pay-per-view in between a big name pay-per-view like Survivor Series, you got to come up with some things. And being in Saudi Arabia, we've seen this in the past. They want to have big names. They want to have people like your Brock Lesnar's. You couldn't have a card without Brock Lesnar or like you said, Goldberg. But that's why they put big people too, like Braun Strowman and Omos, because those are the kind of matches that are want to be seen there. Now I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here and ask you a question because I'm really curious about your opinion here. You mentioned the whole Logan Paul thing, and Jake Paul had just boxed Anderson Silva, right? And there's been a lot of this going on in the last couple of years, that match and Connor versus Floyd and Logan versus Floyd and KSI versus Jake Paul or something like that. Like, there's been YouTubers fighting boxers and MMA stars fighting boxers and etc. The point I'm getting at is, what's your opinion around the whole boxing realm lately? And like, do you think that it's way more fixed now than it used to be? Like, do you think that these guys are actually legitimately beating boxing talents or MMA talents? Is it a lucky punch, or do you think this is all bogus and it's fixed?
It's a good question. Like boxing has, as we know, boxing, that's where it all came from, right? Not professional wrestling, but like, it's boxing first, then mixed martial arts, right? Like, so boxing has been around for the longest time. And, you look at these YouTubers, right? And they're not, in my opinion, they're not fighting legitimate boxers. I'm not saying Anderson Silva isn't a legitimate fighter. He absolutely is. He was extremely dominant in what he did in UFC, and I'm sure he's a very good. I mean, I couldn't get in the ring with Anderson Silva. Are you kidding me? So, like, credit obviously given to Jake Paul for stepping in the ring and staying toe to toe with a guy like Anderson Silva. But the guy's 36, right? Anderson Silva, right? So I think I don't know if it's fixed. There are talks about that they didn't fight to their full limit, yada yada yada, or you know what I mean. Like, but I saw some of the highlights. It didn't really seem like Silva was not giving it. Maybe he wasn't giving his all. Fine, but like, I guess my question is like, are they also trying to bring up the sport, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like, are them boxing in these big matches, is that actually increasing people's interest in boxing, right? Because boxing has taken, to my knowledge, quite a hit over the years due to MMA, right? And again, massive caveat, I have no idea. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a boxing person. I don't watch boxing. I could not tell you who a boxer is. And of course, I know Tyson Fury because he punched Austin Theory and did that very strange ending at Clash of the Castle with Drew McIntyre. But yeah, so maybe it's bigger than I think. But I mean, at the end of the day, they are gimmick fights for sure, right? Like, they don't mean anything. Like, I mean, if I know, Floyd, I think Floyd and Conor McGregor was more legitimate than Floyd and Paul, right? Like, I don't think. I mean, the thing is with Mayweather too, to my knowledge, is he's not a knockout guy. If I'm right, he's more of a defense guy, and doesn't. So like, that fight would have never gotten to a knockout. But like, yeah, I mean, obviously you can't take them seriously, right? Like, I don't know how Jake Paul would do if he actually was fighting like the top boxer right now in the world, right? Like, Silva's a very good fighter, and I think he was a good competition, right? And he won by decision. He knocked, I think, Silva down once. So yeah, right? Like, I mean, it's the same thing with WWE, right? Like, they bring in people all the time. There's Paul, there's Bad Bunny, to my knowledge. Like, they do this too, right? And like, like, I guess it makes more sense in WWE because it's a business, right? At the end of the day, Paul versus Roman is about the business, right? They've got one of the biggest YouTube sensations ever, or not ever, but like, you know what I mean. One of the biggest,
at least influencers at the start of YouTube. Like, he's been around for quite some time, and he's a podcaster as well. So he's just an internet influencer, right?
So you're gonna get eyeballs like on
WWE,
on WWE, right? And you're gonna that's gonna raise the profile of Roman, right? And that's gonna bring more people to want to watch Roman, right? So that's more folks at Survivor Series, more, right? So like, from a WWE perspective, I completely understand. I mean, also, Crown Jewel is not a legitimate pay-per-view.
It's right? A bit of a spectacle on its own.
It's this gimmick that we know that just, it was McMahon trying to grow the revenue of WWE, right? And I know big belts have been changed. I know that's where the Fiend won his belt, right? So like, I know belts do change there, but if you look at the context of this thing, I think I've said this before on our podcast, like, it makes absolute sense why Logan Paul is facing Roman Reigns, because they're not going to waste a legitimate shot of a Kevin Owens or Seth Rollins, right, on this match, because you knew that with the scheduling of Roman and the platform he's on and the pedestal he's on, he's not losing at Crown Jewel, right? He'll probably lose at Mania, right? So, and not everyone's going to watch Crown Jewel because of the controversy around the pay-per-view, right? So, this all makes sense to me, right? So, like, in the boxing world, I don't know. It's a good question. People question it one way or the other. They say it's legitimate. They say it's not. But I mean, if we're looking from a WWE perspective, and I don't know if AEW has done anything like this before. To mind, do you know? Like, have they brought in celebrities for big matches? Yeah.
As far as I know, I think the only thing that's ever happened in AEW is Mike Tyson, I think, was there for an event. I don't think he
Well, I
was
think
in
he's there
for.
next week, isn't he?
Yeah,
Like, I saw his name pop
I
up.
don't think he was in for a match or anything, but I think he was in someone's corner.
Yeah.
And I know Paige Van Zandt has had a couple matches as well, which she was a previous UFC fighter as well.
So guys from UFC, right? So that would make sense. So yeah. So what are your thoughts on it then?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like it is a bit of a skeptic. I'm skeptical, and I think it is like a bit. It is. I just feel like there's events that happen where these boxers are being paid millions, hundreds of millions of
It is
dollars, right?
guaranteed money. That's true.
It's guaranteed money, and they walk away with a purse no matter what, if they lose or win or whatever, and they're taking a risk regardless. But for a guy like Jake Paul, Conor McDavid, or Conor McGregor is sorry, I'd love to see Conor McDavid get in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. No, but Conor McGregor, that was more legitimate, I believe, just due to
it was guaranteed money as well. But
it was guaranteed money, but it was a little bit more legitimate because he was a pretty well successful UFC fighter himself, and with Jake and Logan Paul, I think the interesting thing is, they do have some boxing history. I know they do have a little bit of matches behind them in amateur level, I think, and so there is some legitimacy there, of course. But when they were throwing together matches in boxing, like I know Tyson Fury was calling people out, and Floyd Mayweather has called people out in the past that aren't boxers, and it just seems like a money grab. Like, I don't know, like it's not like boxing back in the past, like like Mike Tyson and when Floyd Mayweather was at his peak, and Oscar De La Hoya and like others. Like, I don't think it's the same level of. I don't think the sport has the same level of, what do you call it, like, legitimacy as it used to, and I think that's because they're bringing in more names that are just like these random influencers and things like that. But I mean, again, it probably comes more so because it is a guaranteed purse. You're walking away with a certain amount of money, and so regardless, they're just kind of doing it for a name. And like you said, it's just like WWE. Like, you bring in a person that is a pretty famous influencer, you're gonna get a good pay-per-view buy-in. You're gonna get a good number at the gate. You're just gonna get views, right? And you're gonna bring people in who might not have liked boxing in the past, and maybe now do want to watch boxing. And now they'll pay attention to Canelo Alvarez, and they'll pay attention to guys like what's his name? What, it's not coming to me. That's okay. Anyways, yeah, so you'll pay attention more to Anthony Joshua, people like that, and Gypsy King, and all that. So you'll pay more attention to the actual boxers in the world, and you'll pay more attention to the sport, I think. So it is a good way to bring people in, and I think it's exactly what WWE does with talent, right?
That's my hope. My hope is that it can raise the profile of boxing, right? Like, it's the most honored and tradition sport, one of the most honored tradition sports that we have, right? So,
and I think it's fallen down over the last couple of decades. Like, it's not as popular as it once was back in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, right?
Goodness no. So sticking kind of with some of the main topics that I think are most popular in WWE, where do you think the Bloodline goes here? Like, we don't have to specifically talk about Crown Jewels. I think the next episode we'll do a preview of Crown Jewel, what we think is going to happen there. But what are some of your what is your let's fantasy book the crumbling of the Bloodline. I think the first question is, if the Bloodline is going to crumble, which event would you want it to be at? Do you want it as soon as Survivor Series, or do you want to wait to Rumble, or do you want to stretch it out as far as Mania?
Well, over the last few weeks, we've already seen some issues, not really a crumble, but some issues within the Bloodline. I think you have to start stirring the pot as soon as Crown Jewel. I think that at Crown Jewel, Roman is taking Logan Paul very lightly. You know, I don't know if you saw the segment where Paul Heyman was like, watch the TV and, you know, it's just one punch. And then he's like, he's not going to get that lucky punch. Like, so I think Roman is taking it very lightly. And I think there may be some sort of squabble with Jay. He might get involved. He might try to help Roman and end up messing it up. And, you know, we'll see.
Lands, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It either way. And then Roman, like, it's the disqualification or something like that. And I don't think Roman's been disqualified yet in his tenure. I don't believe so. Oh, with Rollins.
Not as the universal.
Not as the universal. Yeah. So
with Rollins, he was.
Right. So it has been a while, and I think that does tarnish his record a little bit, or like his ability to say, hey, yeah, you know, I can do this on my own, which we've been talking about for a long time. But I think you got to have something mess up, something go wrong at Crown Jewel as soon as Crown Jewel, because we only have 5 months left till Mania, and if we do want to have this, we have matches galore that we can have at Mania. We could have a Roman and Cody Rhodes match as a return. We could have a Roman and Seth match. We could have a Roman and Brock match. We could have a Roman and Brock. No, I'm just joking, everyone. We don't want to see that again.
No one wants that anymore.
No one wants that. We do have options, and I think that's really fantastic that we have options in that regard. You know, Bray Wyatt could fit into the mix at that point. Maybe that time down the road. I think if you stick him into a title match too soon, it's gonna turn a lot of people off. I think a lot of people won't like that. They've done that to The Fiend, so.
I did see a report that they are learning from their lessons and they're going to keep him away from Roman for a while until they can figure this out.
Because you got to build it up. There's so much outside of that right now that why do you want to throw him into the mix and then create something that is like completely random? You want to have some substance to it. And I think Triple H has done a pretty good job with creating substance around his storyline. So I think as soon as Crown Jewel happens, you got to have something mess up. Sami, Jay, Jimmy, something mess up within the bloodline.
It'll be Jay for sure, but yeah, absolutely.
And then it has to be something that turns into, you know, another one-on-one conversation with Roman and Jay. And I think leading to Jay potentially turning on Roman. Potentially turning on him at some point, challenging him.
Where would you want that? Would you want it as soon as Survivor Series, or do you want another, like, it's War Games, right? So you got to think they would want the Bloodline in the War Game for the men, right?
So exactly, yeah. So I would say
Rumble.
I would say at this case, you have a mess up at Crown Jewel. You have them lose the War Games again because of Jay or someone. They lose the War Games, and then they're really starting to unthread. Then you could potentially have a match between Jay and Roman, either at Rumble, or if they still do Fastlane in February, whatever the pay-per-view is in February.
That's Elimination Chamber.
So you could have, because they had a Hell in a Cell match together. Remember the first, like back when the Bloodline kind of started and Jay like had to side with Roman. That was a Hell in a Cell match. So I mean, I could see it being an Elimination Chamber, and maybe Jay is in that Elimination Chamber against Roman and others.
He turns on Roman. That would make sense.
He turns on Roman at some point, and then I think what you got to see is you have to see, if you're going to build up The Rock, if you want to have The Rock come in, this needs to be a situation where Jay somehow has a conversation with The Rock. He talks to his other family outside of just Roman and the Bloodline, and you know, we don't know about it at this point, but he has to have that conversation. And then the Bloodline itself turns on Jay completely and, like, beats him like they did, like, Sheamus.
Which would be so incredible if that actually happened. Because we were all thinking at one point it was Sami who was going to get booted, right? But now it's really looking like it's going to be Jay, which I think is just awesome. Because he was the one that never really wanted to do this, right?
Yeah.
And you're seeing that Jay again, right? Of, like, this is bullcrap. Like, why is this guy here?
He don't give a damn what the Tribal Chief have to say.
And when he called him Sami Uso, I lost it. That was awesome. So you're thinking really like Mania is when you'll probably see the final collapse of the Bloodline. Is what I'm kind of hearing from you.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking you either see Royal Rumble or Elimination Chamber that him and Jay have a squabble. They'll have a fight. Maybe even Jay gets a title shot again. And then the Bloodline turns on turns on Jay, beats him up really bad, tries to injure him and take him out of competition, and then you hear, "If you smell what the Rock is cooking," right?
That'd
And then
be awesome.
he runs down and he protects Jay, and he says, "Okay, Roman, I'm challenging you. I've had enough of your crap for the last couple of years. We're gonna have a real like head of the table match, and it's gonna be Rock versus Roman for a head of the table." I think if you're gonna place a Rock match, because I know that's their ideal. That's what they really want to do. If you're gonna have that match, it has to be like that kind of thing, like almost ownership or head of the table or that top guy.
The Rock has said he is the head of the table.
And
he has said it.
I will say this: if they do have that match, I think Rock's walking away with the win on that. I don't know why. I just think it would be a good storyline for them to have Rock win and Roman get his head together. He takes a bit of a hiatus, like, I finally had a tough loss. Bloodline's crumbling. I got to take a little bit of a hiatus, and then he potentially comes back months down the road. He's going into a part-time role, anyways, right? So
he is. And Vince's plan was for him to beat the Rock and then eventually lose the titles after that. But it does sound like the winds are changing, and he may or may not have both titles.
Yeah,
he has to face the Rock, because you don't really need the Rock. You don't really need a title for that match, right? It's the head of a table match, right? So I like your timeline. I think it fits pretty close to what I'm thinking too. I think Mania could probably be could be the end of it, right? I do wonder, in that timeline, the Usos need to lose the title belts if you're gonna kick out Jay, right? So where do you do that is a big question.
They lose the belts at Crown Jewel? I think so.
Yeah, you think that? I don't know. I don't think they're ready. I think, and why I think that is, I think it's a valid point, because I think it would definitely fit with the storyline of the Bloodline starting to crumble, especially Jay not being himself and screwing up a lot. Right?
I feel like they're sitting on that number, right? That what do you call it? That
close to the record.
483, 484 days, something like that.
So
if they mess that up, that could be a huge hit on Jay, right? Especially if it is his fault. I feel like if they mess it up, then it's even more reason for Roman to be mad. It's even more reason for the Bloodline to be mad. Then Roman might be like, yeah, you haven't a rematch or something, but this time the rematch is going to be the Usos, Sami and Jimmy Uso.
Yeah. Oh my God, could you imagine? So here's what I don't think they'll lose a crown, and why I think that is, I think for the Usos' career, as wrestlers, I think it's important that you give them that record, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think a big thing is, so November 15th will be the day they break the record. So November 11th, obviously, is the last possible chance for the New Day to stop them, right? And the New Day are now picking up wins again. They beat Maximum Models. They did have a win actually against the Bloodline at some point I think a few weeks ago, right? So what I think is going to happen is they will win at Crown Jewel, but it will be a very costly win in the fact that there will be a ton of mistakes and they almost lose. Same thing with Roman. We all know Roman's winning, but it'll come at a cost to the Bloodline. Something will happen where Roman will almost lose, right? Almost like at Castle, right, where we thought he was Drew had 1, 2, and then Solo pulls him out, right? I think we'll get another moment like that at Crown Jewel that'll cost the integrity of the Bloodline. I do think the New Day will face the Usos on the 11th, and the Usos will win, maybe again at a cost to the Bloodline. And then the 15th, they'll break it, and then that will be the opportunity to then, I think, drop the belts for the Usos. And again, I don't know what that looks like in terms of what H is thinking. I know he's not a fan of the unified titles. He wants them split up. You can see how many tag teams he's bringing back, right? It's just faction after faction after faction, right? Bray's going to have a faction too at some point, right? So at some point, you're going to need to split those titles up, right? So what does that look like? And so do you have them drop one, and that's one storyline, and then they eventually drop the others, right? So, I do think they'll retain, and I agree with you. I find it really interesting too that the Elimination Chambers in Montreal, which I'm super excited about. It's awesome that Canada's getting a pay-per-view, especially if one is it's Elimination Chamber. That's a really exciting match. Which I don't know how for you, but I think Elimination Chamber is one of those ones where I'm like, do I really want to see it in person? Because they have a giant cage blocking my view. It might be actually best to watch that at home.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, if it's in Vancouver, I would go, but maybe not. I think at that moment, like you can really, like you said, have a moment where Jay screws up, and then the Bloodline turns on him, and that's where The Rock can be entered, right? So it'd be really fascinating to see kind of what happens moving forward. And one last thing I wanted to quickly touch on before we move on to hockey is we saw a really exciting return in NXT. Not return, sorry. What do they call that? Not return. It's all been returns, but reveal, I guess. Or is that Ava Rain? Ava Rain, who's 21. And is The Rock, the daughter of The Rock. I'm so excited I can't even speak
Speaking
English.
of The Rock, yeah.
Yeah. She has joined the faction of Schism in NXT, so she has made her NXT debut. So that's going to be very exciting to see how she does. And they've already interviewed one of the Usos, and they said they're really excited to see her. So I am curious if she performs well down there, how quickly they'll want to get her up to the main roster. Because she's her name comes with a lot of recognition, right? She's the next generation for the Anawahi family.
She would be the first. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe she would be the fourth generation superstar. If I do.
What about Solo?
Solo would still be.
Because he's 8 years younger than than Jimmy and Jay, right?
But he would still be their generation. But he would still be because he's still their dad's son, right? So because The Rock would have had his grandfather, his father, him, and then his daughter. So she would be the fourth. Right. I think she would be the first one.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think they'll do her right. Like I think Shawn Michaels is booking NXT quite well, from what I've watched.
Oh, absolutely.
I think they're doing a really good job. So I am curious how anxious they'll be to get her onto the main roster, especially with the lack of female talent that we're seeing on SmackDown. But
they always teased a female on the Bloodline too.
Yeah, well, you don't want to rush her too quick, right?
No.
Then you get a Dominic Mysterio. Oh, sorry. Maybe too harsh for some people. But anyways, I think we'll move on to our next favorite topic. But what do you folks think about the Bloodline? What do you think is going to happen to the Bloodline? What does Sean think? We'll have to ask him about the Bloodline. And
how Ucey are you feeling? We want to know that too.
So Sean, if you're watching, we'd love to know what you think about the Bloodline. So we'll move on to hockey. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our audio podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave a review, star or written variety on the audio side, and leave a review via thumbs up or written review on the YouTube side. But moving over to the NHL,
and subscribe or you will be cursed.
Yeah, we don't want you getting cursed. That's just awkward. But moving over to the NHL, it's been a really interesting start to the season, hey? I think there's some really interesting storylines, including temporary dressing rooms at a certain temporary facility down in Arizona. I don't know if we want to touch that topic because everyone knows who listens to us how much we have some colorful opinions of the Arizona Coyotes. But so what are some of the things that you're sort of interested in and maybe surprised by in the first 10-ish games? So I think we're getting close to the 10-game mark for most teams.
I want to say, well, first I want to start with the fact that I don't want to talk about Arizona because we probably will talk about Arizona too much if we do, but the whole temporary situation is very interesting. We'll have to see a little bit more about what's going on about that.
I will give them one caveat. Hold on. It's called Mullet Arena, right?
Yeah.
In game one, to their credit, they handed out every person in the audience mullets, so they were all wearing mullets. I think that was brilliant marketing.
Love it. Love it.
I'll have to give them some credit.
I love that. A couple of things in the beginning of the season. I mean, apart from our disastrous start at the Canucks, which we discussed in previous episodes, I find it hilarious. I will say this: I find it hilarious watching the Canucks fans of like, oh, we give up on this team. This team sucks so much until they get 2 wins, and then they're like, oh my god, we're back on a roll, and like people are starting to get really happy about it. I find it's bandwagoning at its absolute finest. Apart from that, yeah, I mean, there's been some teams that I thought would do a little bit better than they are doing right now. And there's a few teams that are doing way better than I would have expected. I didn't expect
Boston.
I didn't expect Boston and Vegas to be where they are.
Neither did I.
Because we talked about it, and just all the changes that happened in Vegas and losing goaltending and potentially leaning on a goaltender like Logan Thompson. No offense to him at all, but he's very unproven. I didn't know. And Boston, going through a coaching change and some changes on the organization. I just didn't expect these two teams to be leading the NHL at this point in the season. And one team that I'm really surprised about, but also I did say don't sleep on them, is Dallas. They're sitting, I think...
Yeah, they're playing well.
4th or 5th in the NHL right now, and they're playing... And it is early, I get it, but they're playing better than I would have expected, for sure.
Pete DeBoer's the coach. The Pete DeBoer effect. And probably also Jake Ottinger. Jake Ottinger got hurt, though.
Yes.
So that'll be interesting. Scott Wedgwood is their backup. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it is early, right? So, but I think there are some surprises. I did not see Boston playing this well, especially with their net minding, right? You had Jerry Swayman, Linus Ullmark. Looks like that's working out pretty fine. Team's playing super well, especially with the amount of injuries they got. I mean, Brad Marchand came back from injury, got 2 goals and an assist. Like, that's pretty incredible. He wasn't due to come back till December, and he came back October 27th.
I was gonna say, how could I completely forget? The New Jersey Devils are playing way better than I would have expected them to be playing. I'm quite impressed with their play lately.
Even though they wanted to fire their coach day one, but I don't know if you saw that, but they had their season opener and they renounced Lindy Ruff and they were basically asking for him to be fired. I don't have context on why that is, but they're playing pretty well despite that. I think Toronto's a big one too. I didn't expect them to be so flat, to be honest.
Yeah.
Austin Matthews doesn't have a goal, or he has 1 goal. It's pretty surprising. And this team, like, it's kind of interesting, there's Vancouver and Toronto, and both of them really are upset with their team for very similar reasons, right? I mean, Vancouver's a bit more just dysfunctional, I would say, than the Leafs, of course. Not at the start I thought they'd be having, for sure. They're at 500. They're not, they're playing okay, but it is what it is. I mean, again, like, Boston's leading the Atlantic. I didn't see that coming at all. But I think what's been really fascinating for me too is Edmonton and Calgary. I think they're playing up to expectations, which is nice to see. I think Calgary's. I ended up watching the Calgary Edmonton game yesterday, and man, was that a good game. I almost said series, because it felt like a playoff game yesterday, and you can tell both teams have improved. It was a really, really good game. It was cool to see some of the new players. Fascinating to see, and I don't know why, but Stuart Skinner started yesterday. I thought that was interesting. Jack Campbell didn't start, and they didn't have a game the day previous. So that'll be an interesting little storyline to follow this year for the Edmonton Oilers, because they've had the big money signature to the signing in Jack Campbell. But yet it seems like Skinner's getting some starts too. I don't know if they're doing load management for Campbell, because he does have history of injuries. But I thought that was really interesting. But I think the Pacific is going to be a bit more competitive than. I mean, I said it in our a couple episodes ago that the Pacific is going to be a bit more competitive. But I didn't think it'd be this competitive. Like, there's Vegas, there's Calgary, there's Edmonton, there's LA. Right.
Seattle, LA, Calgary, Vegas, Edmonton, they're all quite close. They're only like a spread of about 2 to
Seattle's
4 points off.
Seattle's trying. You know, it's like the younger sibling trying to hang out with the older kids.
Seattle has the same amount of points as Calgary right now, and I didn't expect that. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. They have 10 points. Calgary's got 10 points, and Edmonton has only 12 points. So that could easily change with a few more losses and a few more wins on the other side. They're just doing better than I would have expected, I guess I could say.
As long as the Canucks are out of the basement. I mean, maybe not. Maybe we want the Canucks to go for Bedard. So the Canucks have made some headlines too. Not that we're trying to be a Canuck-centric podcast, but they are making headlines in the NHL, so it's appropriate to talk about them. They made a few trades, and I think it's very interesting few trades. What was it? Thursday night, they made a trade for Jack Studnicka. I think that's how you say his name. 23-year-old center, right-handed center. And the return for Boston was Michael DiPietro and Jonathan Meyerberg, who's a young, 19-year-old right-handed defenseman who's playing out of the Swedish Hockey League. So it's an interesting trade in the fact that DiPietro finally gets to go to a new team like he's been requesting, and the Canucks have such lack of defensive prospects that they traded one away for a young center. So I think that was a really interesting trade, and I do feel bad for Michael DiPietro because he's now staying with the Abbotsford Canucks on loan from Boston because they don't have any place for him to play, and that was the entire reason he wanted to leave Vancouver, is he wanted somewhere to play. So I feel terrible for Michael DiPietro. That man, comes to the rink every day. He's a professional. He wants to be better. He got completely screwed over by Vancouver with the whole taxi squad situation in 2021. He didn't play a game till March of that year because of all the taxi squad stuff and the COVID. So I do feel bad for DiPietro. And then of course the bigger trade, more profile trade, even though it was a 5th round pick that we traded. We got Ethan Bear from the Carolina Hurricanes. And I asked the Canucks fans what they thought about that, and it was overwhelmingly they loved the trade. Over 90% said that it was a very good trade. So the Canucks got Ethan Bear and a AHL centerman called Lane Pedersen, who actually scored in his first game last night. That was for Canucks, so that's a good trade.
Another Pedersen.
Another pair. That's 3 in the organization. We just need to get all the Pedersens. I think Emil, his brother's playing somewhere. We need to get him. We need to have a whole team of Pedersens, and then we need to have a field day for the jersey people to figure out how they put the Pedersens on the jerseys. That would be quite funny. So that's a really interesting trade for the Canucks because they get their right-handed defender they've been looking for. Is he high profile? No. Is he a project? Maybe. He couldn't really make it on the Hurricanes roster, right? He got beat up by Jalen Chatfield, who, funny enough, used to be a Canuck defenseman. But that can happen on teams, though. I mean, if you look at Vegas's inaugural season, all those players were players that were given up on, right, by their teams, and they almost made a Stanley Cup final, right? So, it has been shown in the NHL that if you get a fresh start, this is Bear's 3rd team, mind you, but people are encouraged because when Bear was playing with Edmonton, he was in a higher role and actually gave out better results. So it's pretty encouraging. So we'll see. They have won 2 in a row. The game against Seattle was, they got to win. That's all that matters. They got to win. And then it's Pittsburgh. They had actually quite a surprising game. I think that for me the biggest story out of that was Spencer Martin. He had I think almost 40 saves, or pretty damn close to it, which is exciting for Canucks fans because we have a backup goalie that if when Demko needs a night off, when he figures out his game, we got a guy we know we can depend on, because that was the biggest thing that killed Demko last year's when Halak would come. I mean, he wasn't getting relief. He'd have to come in those games and play, so he wasn't getting the rest. Funny enough, Halak is playing in New York with Igor Shesterkin this year, so I'm kind of curious how that's going to go. But yeah, so your thoughts on the Canucks and what some of the trades you've seen so far?
Well, I mean, I liked what I saw from Ethan Bear in Edmonton. I thought,
Mhm.
he got more time on the ice, and I think it's a good new environment for him to play in. So I'm excited to see what he can bring to the team. Um, in terms of the DiPietro trade, I mean, I saw it coming. Like, I knew DiPietro was
Yeah.
probably going to be let go at some point and be traded, but I just feel bad for the guy because, he's put in the time and he's not getting anything back. Although, I mean, his outings with the Canucks and what I have seen from him weren't the greatest. So I knew like he wasn't going to fit into this organization anyways. I just
No.
wish they would have done something a little earlier to let him go.
Done better by him for sure. I
Yeah,
completely
done
agree
better
with
by him. Um, but in terms of like the actual games, like that game against Seattle could have gone either way.
you.
I really felt like there were good ups about that game, but there were some really bad downs. But at least we came out with a win. And then the game against Pittsburgh actually really surprised me. I thought I
Me too.
thought Martin played exceptionally well. And it just shows you like, hey, is Demko 100%? Like he hasn't been playing the greatest over the last 10 games, and Martin comes in and he plays a really good game right out of the bat. He's healthy, you can tell, and that makes me wonder, like, is Demko 100%? Maybe he does need a bit more rest, like you said, and then last season caught up to him a lot. But regardless, I felt like they all played pretty well. I'm liking that I'm seeing some production from Ilya Mikheyev.
Yeah.
I'm liking that I'm seeing
And
some
Kuzmenko
from
too.
Kuzmenko. Yeah, that's what was my next guy. I'm liking that we're seeing some production from those two. It's fantastic. And honestly, like I don't know how you feel about it, or what the fans feel about it, but I feel honestly like Horvat's been playing pretty well. He's been kind of the one that I feel like's been playing pretty consistently compared to everyone else. Like JT Miller's had a few down games for sure, and he had a couple of good games. But I mean, yeah, it's up and down, right? Pedersen, same thing. But I feel like Horvat is really, and it's weird for us to think about the fact that there's no negotiations happening, and he hasn't signed an extension or anything because he is really the heart of this team. He is really that leader of this team, and I do feel it like
Especially on the
that.
ice. Yeah.
I do feel it a lot. So it does concern me that we may not be able to retain him long term. But yeah, I mean, I'm not a bandwagoner with this team. I'm not gonna sit here and say that we got these 2 wins that we're gonna make the playoffs. um,
hmm
but it's good. It's the right direction. I think if we can string up a few more wins here and there, I feel like they had a good game on Friday due to the fact they had some momentum. The momentum can really help swing you in the right direction, and
Well, it's interesting because apparently management came down to them after the loss before Seattle and said, if we fire the coach, we're not just making those changes either. Like, you're going to see people leave this locker room. And you know what they did the next game? They fought 4 times.
yeah,
They were like, okay, message sent, right? So I think, I just don't want to be like, I don't want to be the embarrassment of the league. Like that was rough. That was a rough 7 games, right? People were looking at the Canucks and saying, "What the hell is going on? What a joke of an organization! Like that needs to stop." And to be honest with Demko, I think that's why he's not playing well. I think the room is in shambles. That's probably dramatic, but the room is just not where it needs to be. That affects your game, man. If all your friends are fighting with each other, or it's just like when you go to work when you go into work and it's just like this is a strange vibe.
right.
Like I was listening to one podcast and they said when they played Buffalo, it was the game of vibes, and Buffalo had a really good vibe and Vancouver did not. Right, so I just like the locker room needs to, like, if they want to go anywhere, the locker room needs to become more cohesive. They need to stop bickering with each other. They need to step up, right? And they've shown they can do that, right? They also need to be playing better. Like they can't be doing what they're doing. I mean, I know the defense it is what it is, right? But like the defense sucked last year, and they played better than this, right?
They just got to show some consistency to prove to Demko, to prove to the team, to prove to the fans, to prove to the management. They have to show some consistency. They can't go on a stretch of winning losing all these games. They can't just win one game and lose 6. They have to have some consistency.
Yeah.
I think it really sucks that after coming off 2 good wins, they don't play again until Tuesday. So they do have a little bit of
actually, it could be a good
off.
thing. Like they can take some time to actually revel in that. They are going to get Studnicka and Bear in now to get some practice, which is actually really important when you're a new player, is to learn the systems and things like that. Yeah. But the other thing I really wanted to touch on too is since our last podcast, we discussed Juraj Slafkovsky and Shane Wright. And since that, it's actually kind of gone pretty close to what you and I were talking about. Slafkovsky scored a pretty nice goal against St. Louis last night or the night before, and Shane Wright has had 3 straight healthy scratches. So it's hard to get your 9 games if you don't play them. And there are some rumblings that it sounds like there's some disagreement between the coach and the GM what to do with him. And part of me is just like, what are you doing? Like, just send him back. Like, if he's not good enough to make your lineup every single night, why is he here? You are certainly just wasting time. You're wasting his time. He could be back.
You're wasting his development time.
That too, right? Like, he could be back in the OHL playing, tons of games, getting into the World Juniors, like we discussed last podcast. We don't need to get into it. I'm just really confused on what's going on with Seattle, and I'm actually really surprised because Seattle, when they were coming into the league, they sort of prided themselves on, like, we do things differently here, and we hire all these thousands of people that do all these different unique jobs.
Yep.
Yet they're making the same stupid hockey cliches that every other team makes with young players. What is going on there? Like he's a good player. Don't screw him up. This reminds me of it's a bit of an extreme case, but like Gilbert Brulé, right? Like, he played more. But they completely screwed him up. Columbus did, and the guy just faltered out. And the guy was extremely talented.
He was incredible in the WHL and playing for the Vancouver Giants. And then as soon as he went up to the NHL, he was not developed right.
This is the kicker with Brulé. So he was, I think, drafted in 2006. The next year was when the Giants were going to host the Memorial Cup, but they kept him in Columbus, and he played 4th line minutes. Anyways, so that's what I'm worried about with someone like Shane Wright, right? Like, that they're just gonna string him along, and he's like, what do you want from me? Like, how do I get in the lineup, right? Like, maybe he's not asking those questions. I don't know, but like, if you have a concern from him that he's not NHL ready, send him down. You clearly don't need him if he's sitting on the bench, right? Like,
and you're winning without him, honestly,
right? So what's the point? Like, I guess you could argue that he gets to see NHL and hang out with NHLers, but like, if you're that concerned about his attitude, then why did you draft him, right? Like, maybe you should have went with somebody else. I don't know. Like, I don't have all the information. I don't know why they keep stringing him along like this, but it's just I don't feel it's fair for the player.
I mean, we don't know everything behind the scenes and what's going on, but honestly, it does seem like, from our perspective right now, they're making a mistake with them. I'd like to see him go down, but again, to your point, it's kind of hard to hit your 9 games when you're not playing.
Right?
How do you do it?
How can you prove you're in the NHL if you're not playing, right? I mean, and it's practice habits, maybe. Right?
And then what's the point?
Yeah.
Right? What's the point of healthy scratching a guy? Like, it's not doing any benefit for him, but it's not doing any benefit for you as a team. You're just having him sit there and do nothing, and you're paying him.
Well, and is he souring, right? Is he souring?
Yeah.
Is he now coming to the locker room, bringing some sort of, like, he's a young guy, so maybe he won't bring a cancer to the room, but he
could have a bad attitude. He could be angry about being, like, he may feel like we're talking about, like, why am I just strung along? I want to go back to my old team. I want to go and play there. I'm fine with that. I don't have to make the NHL right away. Just make a decision, and he could be on that level of just make a decision, dude. Just decide what you want to do with it.
They're just gonna healthy scratch him until he can play Montreal, so he can just death stare all of the management at the Bell Center.
That would be funny. That would be funny.
That's their.
When do they
plan.
play Montreal?
I don't know, but yeah, no. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there. I think Slafkovsky actually will stay with Montreal. I think they're gonna.
I think so.
Plan it out with him, but again, it makes more, like we talked last time, makes more sense because Montreal's not really striving to be awesome this year, whereas Seattle, I think, really does want to try and make a push for the playoffs. we'll see with the signings they made. But they're also, facing some injuries too. Group hours out, right? So that's with Martin Jones being your starter, that's not the goal for success. But so I think we've had some good chats today on the episode, and some good fun with the Halloween episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. So please, before we say goodbye, please subscribe on YouTube, leave a like, leave a comment, and then of course subscribe on our audio channels, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and leave a review as well. But as I always say, my beautifully bearded friend, thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you, everyone, for this beautiful Halloween episode. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody. And we'll catch you at the next one. Bye.